very least within 50 minutes. So, my name is Cliff, and this is everything I learned about Infosec, everything I needed to know about Infosec I learned from gambling. I'll figure out what the title is eventually. So I am, I'm an IT generalist like a lot of people here. I'm an Infosec guy. I'm an attacker. I'm a programmer. I'm a system admin. I used to be a lawyer, and I am a games and puzzles geek. That includes card games, board games, puzzle games. Anybody ever play the Talos Principle, for example? Anybody? One. We got one. All right. Very good. If you understand that, if you played that game, you know the kind of stuff I like. And you know why I think there's beauty in games and puzzles and in breaking them. So why on earth are we here talking about gambling, about casino gambling? We're going to be talking about advantage players, people who legally wrest the advantage back from the casino to make money. We're going to be talking about cheaters and thieves. Do not try this at home. Please, do not. And if you do, I ain't liable for it. But why are we talking about this at an Infosec con of all places? Well, first of all, it's fun, okay? If you don't want to have fun at 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, then just go back to the office and leave the stick in your butt. Second, it gives me a chance to wear my favorite thrift store find in the world. And it is only semi-ironically my favorite piece of clothing in my closet. But joking aside, it is my opinion, and to me this is very, very clear. Casino game protection is exactly the same business as Infosec. This is not a metaphor. This is not an analogy. It's the same thing. On one hand, you have the hackers, the people who steal data. You have advantage players. You have cheaters who try to take the casino's money. On the other hand, you have the SOCs, the network defenders, the system admins, and the dealers, the pit bosses, and the casino surveillance rooms. They are engaged in the same war and the same fight. And I think it's good for hackers to be a little bit familiar with casino gambling. If nothing else, this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but to give you a sense of wonder at what's possible, to ooh and awe at the things that people get away with in casinos, and maybe to spark your imagination a little bit about the things that you can do, whether you're on the attacking side or the defensive side. There are going to be a lot of little interesting lessons and tidbits, especially for the newbies who are just trying to learn how to think about security and how to approach security problems. And hopefully the veterans in here will get a few new ideas and maybe think about things from a different perspective as well. So, here is a list of some of the most common and most popular games in a casino. Have yourself a quick look. One of these things is not like the other. And by that I mean there is a categorical, fundamental, mathematical difference between that game and the rest of the others on this list that makes it the number one most talked about game in terms of legal advantage play. Any thoughts? Blackjack. Why blackjack? Anybody?
Statistically, I think you've got a greater chance of being able to have some sort of advantage over the house.
Okay, both of those things are true. Blackjack is a game with a very small house edge, and you can count cards, but wait a minute now. Counting cards, how does that help you? Why don't people keep track of what cards have been dealt at Pai Gow Poker? Why don't people keep track of what dice have been rolled at craps? Why is it any different?
Well, dice is going to be random all the time anyway, but you only get a certain number of cards in the deck in a blackjack.
Right, because blackjack is a game with a memory. Blackjack hands are not independent events. At most casinos in the Midwest, you're going to have a 6-deck shoe, which means you've got 6 decks all stacked up in a big plastic case that the dealer deals out of. If you keep track of which cards have been dealt out of that shoe, you have information about which cards are going to come out. And as it turns out, that fact can be used to wrest the advantage back from the house using card counting. And I'm going to teach you how to do it step by step. You could take the information we discuss here, practice for a while, and go into a casino and win with very little other research and reading. So let's talk a bit about the rules of blackjack. As you may know, the game is about getting close to 21 without going over. If you actually study basic strategy, though, it's more about figuring out how much risk you need to take, how likely the house is to bust, that makes you decide what you're going to do, but we'll get to that in a minute. There are a lot of variations on the rules to blackjack, and I've highlighted a few of the ones that are the real source of the house advantage. First and most importantly, if both sides bust, the player loses. Wow. It says player wins on there. That's one error for you. So, if both sides bust, the house wins. So, if you draw to 23 and the house later busts their hand, you still lost their bet. But the rest of these rules change from casino to casino. In some casinos, the house stands on a soft 17. In some casinos, a blackjack, which is a natural, an ace and a face card or a 10, only pays 6-5 instead of the customary 3-2. Blackjack APs never, ever play a 6-5 blackjack game. That's way too much of a bit of theft from the casino. Sometimes the player can't split repeatedly. In some casinos, you can't resplit aces. In some casinos, you can only split to 4 hands instead of 8 or however many. Some casinos allow surrendering, which is where you give up half your bet because you know you're at a very big disadvantage. And there are other rules about when the house checks their whole card for a blackjack. Because if the house has a blackjack, that ends the hand. And that can actually be both a good and a bad thing. That does affect the house edge. Insurance is also an important bet to understand for purposes of advantage play. If the house has an ace up, what do you get to do? What decision can you make? Take insurance. Very good. What does that mean, though? Yeah, basically. So you put up an additional bet equal to half of your bet. That side bet, you're saying, I think the house has blackjack. That insurance bet pays 2-1. So in other words, if the house does have a blackjack, you win the insurance bet at 2-1, and you lose your original bet. So by investing that half a bet, you've hedged against the possibility that the house has blackjack. Now, a little bit of quick math. How many face cards are there in the deck out of 13? 10s and face cards. 3 face cards and 1 10. They all count as 10, right? That's 4. How many non-10 cards are there in the deck out of 13? 9. Is the ratio of 9 to 4 higher or lower than 2 to 1? Higher. So is insurance a good bet or no?
I still don't understand what insurance is.
So, okay, fair enough. So insurance is a bet you want to take if the house is at least a 2-1 favorite to have blackjack.
Okay.
Given that 9 to 4 ratio, if the house has an ace up, is the house more or less likely than a 2-1 underdog to have blackjack? Less. So insurance is a sucker bet in a game with an infinite shoe, or a game where you're not counting cards. If you're counting cards, there are times when you want to take insurance. So where most people start learning blackjack is with this, basic strategy charts. Now, these are generic charts that are designed to give you a general piece of advice about how to play your hands. If you study these charts well and pick one that's appropriate for the rules you're playing on, the house edge may be as low as 0.5% or even lower. Right? So blackjack starting out is actually a pretty decent game if you like to gamble. And just to be explicit, these charts tell you when to stand. You'll notice that if the house has a 2 through 6 up, that means they're likely to have a stiff, which is a number between 12 and 16. Those are hands that are very likely to bust, because if they draw 10, they're over 21. You have to hit a lot of your hands if the house has a 7 or better, because you got to make a pat hand. In order to beat the house, they're not likely to bust. Advice about when to split. Do you split aces and 8s, yes or no? No. Do you split 5s and 10s? You don't split 5s and 10s. And actually, I just agreed with whoever said no in the crowd, so you tricked me. You always split aces and 8s, because an ace is a very good starting card, and a soft 12 is not that good. An ace and another ace is just a 12. A 12 is not a great hand. Similarly, 2 8s is just a 16. That's a bad hand. That's a hand you can't hit with good likelihood. Anything bigger than a 5 busts you. By splitting 8s, you have two hands that start out at an 8. You draw a 10 on that and you're at 18, which is a decent hand. So by splitting that hand, you actually improve your chances of winning. Anyway, this is not about the details of blackjack. Let's get to card counting. This is the high-low system. There are all kinds of card counting systems out there. But this one reflects 2 simple facts about the math of the game. If there are lots of aces and 10s in the shoe, that means the player is more likely to hit a blackjack. Well, if the house can make a natural 2, why does that help the player? Why are blackjacks good for the player? Well, because you win, but the house can beat you with a blackjack as well. What rule of blackjack makes this favorable for the player? Not insurance, no. What happens if the player has a natural, an ace and a 10?
You don't lose.
You don't lose, but you get a 3-2 bonus. Going back to these rules. Blackjack pays 3 to 2. How many people have gambled in a casino before, or do it at least more than once in a blue moon? Okay, a handful. All right. That blackjack bonus is one of the big ways that the player gets pieces of equity back from the house. That's a pretty essential part of the math of blackjack. And we're not going to make everybody experts here. This is a very quick overview because we got other stuff to talk about. Aces and tens make blackjacks. That's good for the player because they get a 3 to 2 bonus. They get paid a time and a half on their bet if they make a blackjack. That's good for the player. 2s through 6s are bad cards to have in the shoe because when the house has one of those ugly hands like a 12 through a 16, these small cards help the house make a pat hand. If the house has a number less than 17, they have to keep hitting. So you want them to be hitting hands like 16s where they're likely to bust. So, and we're going to go through this pretty quickly. If some of the details are a little fuzzy, that's okay. So each card has a value. This is how the high-low system reflects this mathematics. Every card has a value. Any ace or 10 card is a -1. A 7 through 9 is neutral. That's a 0. A 2 through 6 is a +1. And so as you see the cards being dealt on the layout in front of you, you keep track of the running count. Every card that's dealt, you start out at a 0 on a new shuffle. First card comes out. If it's an ace, what's your running count? -1. If the next card is a 2, what's your running count?
0.
Back to 0. If the next card is a 6, you're at 1. If the next card is a 9, you're still at 1. Exactly. That's how you keep the running count. What's the value of a full shoe? If I count through 6 decks and I keep track of every card and every card is dealt out from the shoe, what's my running count going to be at? 6 decks in this case. I'll give you a hint. It's the same answer if there's only 1 deck. 0, because there is exactly as many aces and face cards and 10s as there are 2s through 6s. This is what we call a balanced count. So once you have the running count in your head and you're keeping it accurately, you have to figure out what's called the true count. So let's say that you have a running count of +10. We know that positive counts correlate for the player, are advantageous for the player because of these 2 reasons. Plus counts are better for the player. But if you have a +10 running count, how good is that for the player? It depends how many decks are left in the shoe. Because if the count is +10 and only 2 hands have been dealt, there's still a lot of cards left. That +10 bias that you've tracked in the shoe is diluted over those 5.5 decks that are left in the shoe. But let's say the house has dealt out most of the cards in there, and there's only half a deck left in the shoe, and the count is +6. The running count is +6. How good is that for a player? It's good because that's a heavy bias towards aces and face cards in the cards that are remaining. So, the last thing that APs have to do in a casino is watch the discard tray. As the cards are collected and swept up from the layout after every hand, they get placed in this tray. So you have to be able to look at this discard tray and estimate just visually how many decks have been dealt out. Subtract that number from the number of decks that you know are in the shoe, and that's always advertised. They'll always tell you this is a 6-deck or 8-deck or double-deck game. So then, knowing how many decks are left, you divide the running count by the number of decks left, and then you have the true count. That true count is an objective measure of how biased the shoe is in favor of the cards you want to be dealt out. And so when you correlate your bets with the true count, that's how you take the advantage back from the casino. If you're betting $10 when the count is 0 or negative, but betting $100 when the true count is +4, then you're making big bets when the shoe is favorable and making small bets when the house has a big advantage. So that is how blackjack can be beaten. All right? That's the core of it.
Can we go to the casino after this?
Hell yeah! Let's do it. Let's go to the casino. I know quite a few in this town. Here's the scary thing about it. I actually have an old friend who's a dealer and a pit boss at one of the casinos in town. So if I take this crew over there, he'll know me and he'll probably figure out that you guys are up to something. So I'll steer you away from that casino if you want to go count. But in all seriousness, no. Doing this in practice, in a casino, playing basic strategy correctly while you're doing all this, it's extremely difficult. Don't go and try to do it tonight. It takes a lot of practice. Dead serious. It takes a lot of practice to learn. People practice for months and years to do this. By the way, if you do all this, how big of an advantage do you think you have over the house? About that. So the house edge starts out at 0.5% or so, roughly. If you do all this and you correlate your bets with the true count, how big of an advantage do you think you can get back from the house?
Maybe just looking at you got a 0.5 on that.
Practically, if that's all you're doing, you're somewhere in that range. You're at about 0.5% to 1%. And there are some very important security-related things that modulate that advantage you have. So let's pause here and talk a little bit about Infosec. So as clear as mud as all that math was, I know, it illustrates something very important about Infosec, and that is the way I define hacking. A blackjack AP hacks the game. And I say that because a hacker, as I define the term, is someone who uses deep system knowledge. Blackjack APs, advantage players, know the mathematics of blackjack better than 99.99% of casino dealers out there, and better than quite a few pit bosses and surveillance people as well. 2, you violate the expectations of the designer. 3, you cause the target to behave in an unexpected way or an unintended way. And number 4, you often use deception to evade defenses and remain undetected and get to do what you do for a long time. So, card counting was popularized in a book published, I believe, in 1968 called Beat the Dealer by a mathematician named Edward Thorpe. How do you think the casinos felt about that book being published? Wrong. The casinos loved it. The reason why? Oh, yeah, exactly. Most people who think they can do it can't do it. They don't have the deep system knowledge, they don't understand the math, or they go into gambler-like thinking, I'm on a streak, I want to push my bets up, and you just saw 8 tens on the previous hand, and the count is back to 0. And when you're dealing with margins that small mistakes like that can cause you to just bleed away all the expected value you've built up through good play. So that's the definition of hacking as I describe it. And it's hacking writ large is something that can be done to any system. Remember, casino people, both the surveillance folks and the advantage players and cheats, do the same thing as we do. The technical stuff is just different. Instead of code and buffer overflows and, MS17010, they're dealing with cards and chips and dice and slot machines and security cameras. The processes they go through are the same. Here's a little more on card counting. Another big trick in the AP's arsenal is what we call back counting or wonging. Anybody know where the name wonging comes from? Any of you gamblers know? One of the seminal works on blackjack advantage play is called Professional Blackjack, and it was published under the name Stanford Wong. It's named after him because he's one of the people who popularized it in that book. And to do that, you just stand at the table and don't play. As soon as a new shuffle happens, you watch, you keep the running count, and then when the true count hits a certain threshold you've decided, when the true count hits a +2, for example, that's when you sit down. What that does is it sweeps away all those hands you have to play at minimum bets, so you're only betting when you have the edge. Anybody have an idea of why that's a little bit of a dodgy thing to do in practice? Or at least a challenging thing to do? It looks pretty obvious. And there's some trickery that you can do to make it a little bit less obvious, but it's a dangerous thing to do. So basic strategy deviations, you're going to see a chart on the left that on the right. Pretend I know my left from my right, Jesus. So on the left here are an illustrious 18. These are 18 basic strategy deviations. You remember those charts from before about how you should play each hand? And I know you can't read this, forgive me. These are 18 rules about what you should do depending on how high or low the true count is. For example, if you can read that, that's going to say you should take insurance when the true count is +3. That means that if the true count is +3 and you see an ace up for the dealer, there are enough tens left in the deck that it's worth it for you to buy insurance. That actually increases your EV. Another example down here, tens against a 6. You have a pair of 2 tens. What do you have the option to do with the pair in blackjack? Split them. That means you put down another bet and play 2 different hands. Does splitting tens sound like a good idea in general? No, because you go from a 20 to a 10. And a 10 can be great and it can also be awful. You draw a 6 on that 10, you're in bad shape. But it's correct to split tens against a 6 when the true count is at least 4. Because you're very likely to just draw another 10 and have a 20 on each of your hands. And the house is very likely to flip up a 10 in the hole and just bust it with another 10. So, Another important thing that some blackjack players do, there are two kinds of team play. Now, who here has read Bringing Down the House or has seen the movie 21? What am I getting? Okay, few people have. Yeah, well, as I understand it, the movie butchered the facts. I haven't seen it, but there's enough. I read that there's enough question about how accurate the book is and how much he sensationalized things with the purple chip laying on the table in his apartment and all that. The movie is fantasy from what I've heard. So there are a lot of people who play blackjack just pooling their money. We're going to play and we're going to split each other's wins and losses. There are also people who play as a team in the casino. So you have one player who just blends in with the crowd playing basic strategy and betting table minimums. When they see a massive true count, what do you think they do?
Stand up and holler.
They stand up and holler, exactly. They say, "Hey, Mr. Pit Boss, I'm on a blackjack team." No, they do a subtle signal. Might be this, might be this, might be this. But they signal somebody who's often called a big player to come over to the table. That person knows that there's a positive count, and often might have the count surreptitiously told to them by the signaler. In Bringing Down the House, how did they do it?
Behind the back is the mark.
Okay. In the book, they describe it as using a code word. So if the running count is +8, they'll speak the word eggs aloud because a number 8 looks like 2 eggs. So the big player comes on with a high positive count and starts out making $200, $500, or $1,000 bets. This is a massive way to really leverage the advantage you get from card counting. But you got to be careful. In some states, if you're detected, they can indeed back you off, as they say. That might be as simple as saying, "Ms. Turner, your game's too good for us. We can't have you playing blackjack anymore. If you'd like to sit down at one of our slot machines, you're welcome to." Back in the 60s, people actually... there were probably some instances where people got the crap beat out of them in back rooms. But that's back when the days when most of Vegas was controlled by mobsters like Benny Binion, for example. In the state of Missouri, they cannot tell you can't play blackjack anymore. But they can change the rules. They can say you can't enter mid-shoe, which prohibits a big play, either the signaling with teams or back counting or wonging in. It's worth pointing out that style of team play where you signal the big player to come in, that's perhaps the most famous style of play, but it's actually a very small percentage of the blackjack advantage play that goes on. Most teams actually just pool their money and that's all they do. They don't do all that signaling. Incidentally, in Missouri, this regulation enshrines in law that it is not cheating to count cards. They can't arrest you. It is a myth that it is cheating and illegal to count cards. In Missouri, it's enshrined in the regulations in the black and white text. However, you can't do it with the assistance of another person. So signaling may very well be a crime in the state of Missouri. So, detection and cover. This is a big chunk of the blackjack advantage play world. We talked about that a lot. Already we've discussed that. In the surveillance room, one thing they will do, just count down the shoe with you. Card counting is not some kind of arcane, secret technique that's known only to criminals and people who sit hunched over blackjack layouts with a hoodie over their head in basements somewhere. The surveillance rooms know all about it. At the World Game Protection Conference in Las Vegas, they have competitions sometimes, as most conferences do. We have CTFs. What do you think World Game Protection does? Card counting competitions. There's a video on YouTube of the finals of their card counting competition. Guy took a deck, spread it out, counted through it in, I think, 7.5 seconds or so. They removed a couple cards from the deck beforehand to prove that he'd counted it correctly. So he went through it in like 7 seconds. He says, "It's +1. They turned over the last 3 cards and he was correct. There were 2 neutrals and a minus. Surveillance people know all about this. They share tradecraft just like we do. Dealers call things out in the pit sometimes. You ever heard anyone say, hitting a hard 18 or doubling a 14 or anything like that? Sometimes the dealers will verbally call out strange plays to the pit boss. Sounds a lot like something we might do, isn't it? They have analysis software. As we talked about briefly before, what do you think you do if you're an AP to avoid detection? What's the central trade-off you have to consider? Sorry? Just how well you play. There is almost no blackjack AP in the world who will split tens. Because it is such a red flag. No gambler is ever going to split tens. Only an AP, a card counter, is going to do that. There are other things like avoiding back counting and all these other techniques that are so good. So there's constantly a trade-off of how good am I going to be, how much of an EV am I going to earn, and how obvious am I going to be. Yeah, basically don't port scan everything or don't fire every exploit you know. So, and attackers have the same trade-off. The noisier you are, the more likely you are to get caught. But the less noisy you are, the fewer techniques you have to rely on. It's the same thing. So let's move away from the legal advantage players and go to casino cheating. So first of all, I need someone who would like to play a dealer for me. Come on up. So the source for most of this material about cheating comes from this book. I'll post book recommendations when I post the slides if y'all like, but we're going to demo 3 cheats here. And all 3 of them are talked about in exquisite detail in this book. It's American Roulette by Richard Marcus. If you like this stuff, you've got to read this book. So, yeah, over there. Are you all right with me touching your hand when we do this? Just gently, like that? Just when we do this, are you all right with me just touching your hand when we... Okay. So, here's what we're going to do. This is the first move I'm going to show you. There are 3 different things demonstrated by this move. The first one is called the 205. By the way, where did the term past posting come from? Anybody know? Came from horse racing. Refers to betting on a horse after it has gotten past the post. So the cheat that we are going to show involves increasing a bet after the bet has already won. So you are my dealer. What's your name again? Scott. Scott. We've definitely met, but I've forgotten your name. So, all right. Pretend that you are my dealer. Okay. I am sitting here at the leftmost position on the table. Now think about the detail that goes into this cheat. All right? Notice everything you can, and you watch everything you can as well. Now, I'm not a chip mechanic. You're going to see me do the move. All right? My hands don't move that fast. I'm not that dexterous. There's my bet. There are the other players' bets. Okay. Pretend you just busted your hand and you need to pay us all. Okay. Hey, you paid me wrong. I'm betting black chips here. You give me $15. What is this crap? Come on. Pay me. Come on. Pay me right.
So I'd have to go to the camera.
that would happen, yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. So, and now I'm betting for the next hand. So, what all did you notice that happened there?
Substituted red chips with black chips.
So I started out with 3 red chips, and with 2 hands, it's amazing that you can get away with that, pulled back the red chips and put down 2 blacks covered by a red. What is the value of a black chip? $100. What's a red chip? $5. That's why it's called a 205. So I did that. What else did I do with my hands? Did anybody see? It's a little hard to see from a distance.
As I was going over, you tapped my hand.
I tapped your hand when you were going over there. What effect do you think that's going to have on a dealer in a real casino? Draws the attention to the tapped hand. How often do you think players touch dealers' bodies? Never. I may as well just punched you in the nose. Yeah, it's rude as hell. And that's just shocking. So what else happened with my hands? When I sat down, did you see that I had a stack of black chips here?
Oh, I didn't.
So what the cheater does is they pretend to be playing reds and greens, which are $5 and $25 chips. But at the same time, I take the move chips, the 205, I hide it in my hand, and I cover my black chips with it. So he thinks I'm just a red and green player. When I do the move, I've switched in these, and I uncover the backup chips. When I tap his hand, he goes, oh, holy shit, this guy's a black chip player. And so he says to the pit boss, black in action, I'll do the hand cup towards the microphone. So you're hit all at once with the black chips. I take away a chance for you to notice, okay, this guy's bought in for a bunch of $100 chips, but he's not playing them yet. So this happens all at once very quickly. What did you see when I started saying you paid me wrong? What were my hands doing?
They were open.
Hands are face up, palm up, so I look innocent. Right? If I were wearing a jacket, I would hide the red chips in my pocket, the ones I took away. And the last thing I did before you paid me I kick the chips back at you. Why? Add pressure.
I don't want this. This isn't mine.
It's aggressive. It tries to give it back to you. But also, when I do that, if you call your boss over, what is the boss going to see? They see a bet of $205 that this guy hasn't paid. So the boss, the first thing they're thinking is, you got to pay this guy. Also, what were you doing when I actually tapped your hand and went into the claim? You were paying this guy. Why not wait until he's paying the fourth player all the way over at first base?
You'd notice before that. It's not realistic.
I'm sorry? There's that. I might have already retracted my winnings. That much time elapsing between the wrong payout and the claim makes it more look like it increases the chance that the dealer is going to even consider the idea that I pass posted, that I added money to my bet after it already won, right? So it's got to be quick, and it shows how good you have to be as a mechanic to get away with this move, right? So all those individual little psychological tricks that are used, because when you're doing this, you don't have to beat the eye in the sky. The eye in the sky hasn't been activated against you yet. Yes, they're always watching. The cameras are always on, but there's not always a person looking at the screen. Not every piece of data that gets collected. Thank you very much. You're fired, by the way. You paid off a cheater. So that's an example of that is an example of the tremendous amount of psychological detail that goes into this. The next move we're going to talk about is roulette pass posting. And because we're a little low on time, I'm not going to go through the rigmarole of doing it. But this is what a roulette layout looks like, right? You've got the dealer standing right here with chips, the chip well behind them and to the right. So this particular move, this shows the way that a good hacker can find the weaknesses in procedure and exploit them to their advantage. All right. So there are several things that a roulette dealer does when bets go down before the ball gets spun. Or rather, one important thing they do, and that is that they case the layout. They look at all the chips out there. Now, if you're playing roulette, what kind of chips are you betting? Are you betting normal casino chips? No, you usually buy in for roulette chips, which are brightly colored chips that you can only cash back out at the roulette table. But some casinos at least used to let you buy in with regular casino chips. And so you could potentially pass post a black chip on the layout, a $100 chip. And the way they would do that is they would use an important cover, which is that someone would bet a whole bunch of stacks of dark-colored chips low down on the layout. And then the cheater would swap out this stack of 4 blue chips for 3 blue chips and a black. So the black chip doesn't stand out. It is plausible that the dealer missed the black chip because it just blends in with all the other dark stuff deep on the layout. There's one other very important detail, and this is another cover play done by one of the compatriots. They bet a big old stack of roulette chips right here on this third dozen bet. What does that bet pay? Anybody know? 2 to 1. That bet pays 2 to 1. Somebody said it back there, yeah. So when that bet comes in, what does the dealer physically have to do? They have to go back to the well with both hands and grab 2 stacks of chips. That action of grabbing multiple chips gives you just enough time to do the move. So first of all, they exploit the fact that you can use both the colored roulette chips and normal black casino chips at the same table. They use that to blend in, and they get the time to do the move by betting that stack of chips that has to be paid off with a 2-handed turn. So by taking very specific actions, they exploited weaknesses in the house's procedures. Now the last one we're going to talk about is called the Savannah. The Savannah is reverse pass posting. It's pass posting backwards, and it is the most brilliant cheating move I've ever heard of. I think most people would agree. Trick with the Savannah. You just bet on one of these column bets down here at the end, far away from the dealer, a black chip or any other high-valued chip with a couple red chips on top of it. You stack them up with the low-valued chips offset maybe 1/8 of an inch. so that when you're looking at it from a distance, you can't see that dark chip underneath. You don't get caught when the dealer is casing the layout. If the bet wins, you immediately go, yeah, hit the big one. I won $200 or $5,000 or whatever it's going to be. What do you do if the bet loses?
Take the top and bottom.
You should take the whole thing off.
Oh, really?
The whole thing. What does the dealer do at this point?
He demands the two on top that are lower than himself.
Put that back down. You took that bet already lost. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just junk. I don't know what's going on. What do you put back? Do you put back?
I thought it was just take the expensive one off the bottom.
It's not.
Way smarter.
It's beautiful. You put down a bet that looks like it's $20 for reds. You sneak it away when it loses, and you put back 4 red chips for $20. So when you make this bet, you either win on a bet of $115, or you lose a bet of $20. What else is brilliant about this? What does the house do when they realize you tried to take away $20 but put it back?
They just go after you for what they saw on top of far lower amount than you bid.
If you realize that somebody was finagling a $15 or $20 bet, how big of a deal is that?
No.
It's not a big deal. They don't call surveillance when you do this move. And again, you want to immediately celebrate when the move wins because you want to eliminate any possibility whatsoever that they think that bet was past posted. You separate the move from the time when you get paid. And the move is sneaky enough so that when you do the thing that's illegal, you get underneath the detection thresholds because it doesn't look like enough money to be a big deal. So they did very well with this move. And we're going to go through this quickly because I talk way too damn much. So, what is the casino's biggest advantage in this fight? The information. You as a defender have a massive information advantage. You all know that. What is the cheater's biggest advantage? Well, there's that. That's part of it. This is the other piece of it. A lot of noise. In a casino, in a busy casino, you have drunk tourists. You have pensioners banging away at slot machines. You have people who think they can beat the house but don't know what they're doing. Jon Stewart had a joke towards the end of the Daily Show's run under him about Bullshit Mountain. A busy casino is basically Bullshit Ocean because there's so much nonsense. If I open a casino, I think I'll call it that, Bullshit Ocean Casino and Resort. This is what you're up against as a surveillance artist, as a surveillance worker. Stuff like lifting off a $20 bet from the layout, that's not that weird. That's just not that strange. People getting angry at the dealer, touching their hand, that's not that weird. Casinos have all this software, BJ Survey, Blackjack analysis software. Detects whole card players who are catching the whole card when the dealer deals it too far vertically where you can see the index on the card. You can figure out exactly how good they are at counting cards. Biometrica, big company in this space. Facial recognition software. You can take a picture of a player, run it through a database. Old piece of software called NORA, non-obvious relationship analysis. Remember over here on the roulette pass post, the third section straight up. It took at least 3 people to do the move. You needed someone to bet the big stack of white chips, someone to bet all the blue chips, someone to claim the move. Those are 3 different people. NORA, non-obvious relationship awareness, was a piece of software that would identify people and run them through a collection of personal information, a collection of OSINT data, and figure out if any of them have worked together, lived together, might know each other. Think how strong that software would be with social networking now. This was some guy's capstone project for a master's or PhD. He called it Rainman 2.0. Rainman gets card counting pretty wrong in a lot of ways, but this is dynamic machine learning software that will track the indexes of the cards with a camera. And yes, it's counting cards. It realizes the count is 0. You have 2 face cards, a 3 and a 5. That's a total count of 0. Why do blackjack counters still get away with it? They can't be watching everywhere. Yeah. The detection and response systems don't run themselves. We still do not live in a world where the surveillance systems are smart enough that the minute a bad guy walks in there, they're immediately detected. The minute an AP on a blackjack table increases their bet to match the count, they get backed off by a pit boss. The casinos couldn't do that. They're risking too much money by backing off a legit good customer who's going to lose a lot of money to them in the long run. This stuff is hard. You play until a human catches you. You can take the words card counting off and replace them with hacking if you want. It works, but not forever. It is not about preventing it. It's about minimizing your time to detection and your time to response. So that's why APs have to do that trade-off of how aggressive they're going to be with their basic strategy variations and how aggressive they're going to be with their betting. The exact same thing happens with hackers. I might be able to stay in a network for 6 months if I'm not doing anything. The minute I start rummaging around for stuff, I'm increasing the likelihood that things are going to go wrong. And think about the Savannah. They got away with this so many times in so many different casinos. Part of the reason why they got away with that is that they didn't have people going through their surveillance footage just on a general hunt for anything fishy. If they hadn't been so tied to this question of whether the black chip was there to begin with, because the surveillance footage helps the cheater there. The bet was always there when you did the Savannah. That's why they got paid so many times. They weren't just digging through their footage looking for bad stuff going on. What do we call that in InfoSec? Threat hunting. Threat hunting is absolutely essential. Every alert threshold can be evaded. So as a brief intro to how to approach threat hunting. This is advice from this book. It's a textbook about casino gaming surveillance. They do what they call the IOU Patrol. Identify, observe, and understand. Identify, look at each of your players, see what you know about who they are and what they're doing. Observe, collect information about their play. Understand means you analyze until you come to a conclusion. Is this just a gambler who might be getting lucky and that's why they're beating us? Is this a card counter? Is this a shuffle tracker? Is this player's play so strange that we actually need to figure out if they've got a teammate? This is a good starting point for how to approach threat hunting. When you see activity on your network, identify the pattern, gather as much information as you can, and then try to understand it. That may mean going to threat databases. That may mean correlating other logs. That may mean checking virus total. That may mean looking at histories for the particular user in question, looking at IP reputation information. But this I would recommend as a starting point for how to do threat hunting. Also, App Sensor, that is an OWASP project. It is a standard for writing defensive tools for applications, but I think the same type of analysis can be used for network threat hunting. This is the 3 questions in the App Sensor paper that says how we determine whether behavior is just suspicious or actually an attack. First of all, could the event have happened through innocent user error? Is it possible that the user just accidentally typed .. in the location bar? Who knows, maybe. Must the user leave the normal flow of the application to do the thing we observed? Is this something that would not happen through normal clicks, or are they deliberately going out of their way to find this? And third, are specialized software or knowledge needed? To send a malformed HTTP request, do you think most users are going to be able to do that with just their browser? No, that's super suspicious. This is another very good starting point for how to determine whether something is actually attacker behavior. Experience will help you identify weird activity. The best example of this in the casino world I've read about is, again, from this book. A surveillance person doing an IOU patrol, just looking through security cameras, found a slot player with an ashtray sitting up on the machine covering the display of credits counting down. Any idea why that might have been? Give you a hint, it was a machine that paid out in real coin. They were using a device called a light wand, one of the most infamous slot cheating devices ever. It shines light directly into the coin reader, the optical reader in the coin payout. It essentially blinds it. When you flash that light, the coin counter doesn't know it's dispensing coins to you. You turn that thing on and it'll give you coins all day and all night. The ashtray was up there because he knew he was being watched. And so he wanted to cover the credit out display so that anyone walking by or anyone watching him in surveillance wouldn't see that counter stutter and slow down because all the coins weren't being counted going out. So that is, having the experience to know what's weird and unusual is truly essential. And that's one of the things we will learn over our careers. But before you can do any of this, any of this threat hunting business, any of this detection or analysis, there's one thing you got to start with. Centralize your damn logs, to quote Jake Williams, his best advice. Yes. Jake Williams, smart guy. I trust him. You don't have to have a whole bunch of fancy stuff. You don't have to spend $50 gazillion on Splunk or Logarithm or, I'm probably not supposed to say that. You don't have to spend ungodly amounts of money on expensive commercial products. Look at open source versions of tools like ElkStack. You could probably get a lot of this done just with some open source log collection and searching tools and a really good shell scripter on your team. So, one thing I will say, collecting the logs is always the first step, but the analysis step is more important. So, yes, start with collecting the logs and worry about detection later, but make sure you get to that detection and analysis step. Don't just collect the logs and let them sit there. That's the other side of the coin from this. How many people have done that? Everybody. All right, we'll go quickly through the last 18 slides. Every component of your operation is a target. Every casino game is a target. Every table game, every machine. How many ways are there to beat a blackjack game? You don't have too long to brainstorm over this, but you can manipulate the cards. You can physically mark the cards if you're in a casino where you're allowed to touch the cards because they're dealt face down. The dealer can steal from you. You can mark the cards with invisible ink. There are all kinds of ways to beat any given table game. And so whenever you're deploying a new technology or considering deploying a technology or securing one that already exists, I would start with these three questions. What can I do? What are the operations I have access to? What can I learn? What information leaks? And what can I touch? What other systems does this let me interact with? Anybody know what STRIDE stands for? That's exactly the process you go through in securing a table game. It's the exact same thing. One of the procedures that dealers do. Anybody know what a dealer does when they get tapped in or out? They clear their hands. Sometimes it's holding them up. Sometimes they dust them off. But that procedure is designed because the dealer is one of the most trusted people on the floor. STRIDE threat modeling. Who's heard of this? It involves thinking of all the different attacks against a system, and it involves, shock of all shocks, a box and arrow diagram. This is worth doing because it forces you to break down your system, whether it's a network or application, into its constituent components. This example is a Windows Sound API in the operating system, and yet they broke it down into individual components. Every piece of a system can attack other pieces of a system, and this process forces you to think through your defenses. So you design procedures based on your threat model, and you detect attackers at the margins. It's not the exploit, it's the other stuff they do. Understanding the adversary conveys a massive advantage. Dan Kaminsky put it this way: you get to cheat. Casinos get to change the rules on you. They can flat bet you. They can tell you can't change your bets. They're allowed to do that in Missouri. You get to put honeypots on your network. You can set traps for the attacker when you understand how they think. Here are a few examples. One of the best I will share with you. Ben 10's PowerShell defense repo. It injects fake credentials in the network. So someone runs Mimikatz and tries to log in somewhere, your SIM alerts on that. These last couple examples are about weaponizing the IR process in phishing. Great stories. One of them is you send an email you know is going to get caught. This is due to Rob Fuller and Chris Gates. Then when you watch how they analyze all the infrastructure you set up, you know their IR playbook. And the last one, sometimes people forwarding an email around internally makes it trusted. And suddenly, the content you put in the email gets loaded. Think creatively. We are never going to have it all figured out. Social engineering tip: always get out and stay out in front. There was an instance where a pass post went horribly wrong in the book American Roulette. The member of their team who was in charge of security spilled a club soda all over the roulette layout and started apologizing profusely. He made the staff react to him. He took control of the situation. Always stay out in front if you're doing social engineering. Practitioners tip: never underestimate the value of a good cheapo. Another one of the best stories from American Roulette. Instead of pass posting 205 once, one of the members of the team who was retiring pass posted a rainbow. A yellow, a purple, a black, a green, and a red. He switched out 5 red chips for 5 different colors. He got paid because the psychology was all that matters. I'm being told to STFU, focus on the fundamentals. That is the last career tip I have. Understand the technology, understand the attacks and defenses. That's all I got. I will post the slides so you can actually read the InfoSec content on this. So thank you very much.